As over 150 heads of state and government and an entourage of ministers and officials descend on New York and the United Nations for their annual diplomatic jamboree, this expert says the organization is facing a number of issues that complicate the road ahead.
The UN is simultaneously struggling with a very bad political situation because the big powers still have very tense relations, and at the same time a very bad financial situation because the UN was heavily reliant on US financial support, which has been taken away. And this bad political situation and bad financial situation are coming together in a way that makes the organization's future feel very shaky. I think that if the US steps back from the UN, then a lot of other countries will ask whether it's worth continuing to work through the organization. Now, we have seen countries continuing to negotiate on things like a pandemic treaty, even though the US walked away. But the US has been central to funding the organization, and ultimately the US has been the key power in the UN Security Council.
Meetings kick off in earnest on Monday with an event to mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, followed by the annual SDG moment that seeks to infuse the development agenda with much-needed momentum, followed by a two-state solution conference as the war in Gaza continues unabated. The general debate begins on Tuesday, a climate summit on Wednesday amid a push towards a new clean energy era, the launch of a global dialogue on AI governance, and a G20 ministerial meeting ahead of the Leaders' Summit in South Africa this November, among some of the key events. We asked Gowan which issues are likely to dominate this year.
I think there are going to be three top questions around this General Assembly. Firstly, what does Donald Trump say? Will he send out some challenging messages about the future of international cooperation? Second, Gaza. Everyone's eyes are on the appalling situation in the Middle East, and everyone is desperate to find a way out of the war. And then finally, there's just a question about where is the UN heading? And is it possible to reform the organization so that it survives these very difficult times?
With the wars in Ukraine and Sudan, the latter representing the largest humanitarian crisis in the world today, also expected to draw some discussion from leaders across the board.
It's tragically the case that right now, world leaders have limited bandwidth. And I don't even think that the war between Russia and Ukraine is going to get as much attention this year as it has in past years. I think there is a feeling amongst a lot of UN members that although there are many crises in the world, the organization has a special responsibility for the Palestinians. After all, the UN has been involved in the Israeli-Palestinian situation since the 1940s, and so it does tend to dominate. But it is tragically true that there are people suffering in Sudan and many other places who are not really going to be on the agenda for a lot of leaders at the high-level week.
South Africa also due to host a G20 ministerial meeting, with Gowan offering some thoughts on how President Ramaphosa could leverage the UNGA towards G20 ambitions.
Although President Trump has said he's not going to go to this year's G20, Ramaphosa can still use this General Assembly as an opportunity to talk about what South Africa wants to achieve in the multilateral space. I mean, South Africa is seen still as one of the most active non-Western countries at the UN over Gaza and other topics. And I think that Ramaphosa can talk about how South Africa is attempting to use the G20 to advance an agenda that's meaningful for African countries and other countries outside the West.
A key stress test of international cooperation and multilateralism writ large. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called this UNGA a fundamental moment for leaders to come together and find mechanisms of dialogue and ways to start processes for crises to be effectively solved, urging leadership from the top and a laundry list of challenges that need effective intervention to save lives, the planet, and the effectiveness of institutions in a world hamstrung by disagreement and growing impunity. Sherman Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.